The valet had already gone. I parked my own car at the far edge of the gravel lot. The crunch under my tires loud in the still evening, a reminder that I was late and alone. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, my palms slick, pressing against the folds of my dress, trying to smooth out the creases that had deepened during the long drive. It hadn't been a graceful arrival an hour delay from a flat tire. The struggle with the jack in a faded rest stop parking lot. Gravel embedding itself into the skin of my knees as if the day itself was already warning me. By the time I reached the vineyard, the sun had already dipped low, spilling gold and violet across the sky. The kind of light that photographers cherish and that wedding planners design entire ceremonies around. I should have been inside by now, smiling for photographs, greeting distant relatives, blending into the carefully rehearsed perfection of the evening. Instead, I hurried across the uneven gravel, a gift bag swaying at my side, its handles digging into my palm with each jarring step. The laughter reached me first. It floated from the patio, a sound so polished and effortless it might have been bottled with a champagne. The kind of laughter that makes you think of belonging, of being on the inside of a shared secret. I followed it around the edge of the building, avoiding the grand double doors at the front. The thought of pushing them open mid-toast, mid-dance, and feeling every eye fall on me was unbearable. I told myself I was being polite, considerate. Deep down, I knew I was also bracing, protecting myself from whatever reception might wait inside. The patio curved into a courtyard, a fire pit glowing at its center. Around it, a small circle of guests raised their flutes, their faces gilded by firelight and sunset. I slowed, not ready yet to step into their circle, to announce myself. I lingered behind the hedge, just close enough to listen. Thank God she didn't come, someone said, the words sliced through the air sharper than the pop of any cork. For a moment I thought I had misheard, that the evening breeze had twisted syllables into something cruel. But then the laughter followed, easy, unhesitating, confirming it was Lauren, my new daughter-in-law. Her voice carried a brightness, a theatrical sigh layered over her words. She means well, she said, but she's just a lot. The laughter swelled again, overlapping each chuckle in agreement, a clink of glasses sealing the sentiment. Someone murmured something about energy, another about vibe. Words chosen like polite daggers. And then Elias, my son. He laughed too. Not nervously, not apologetically. Just a clean, untroubled laugh, as if the words hadn't gutted me, as if they were nothing more than harmless fun. He didn't say my name. He didn't defend me. He leaned in, kissed her temple, raised his glass high enough for all to see, and smiled. I froze. My hand clenched around the quilt bag until the paper crinkled and the ribbon dug into my skin. The quilt inside 2.5 months of stitching, piecing, ironing until midnights sat silent and heavy in my lap. Cream, paper, burgundy ribbon, the colors of their wedding. I had checked twice, 3 times to be sure. The wind shifted, curling under my shawl and brushing the words deeper into my ears, as though the air itself refused to let me escape them. I stepped back carefully, heels whispering against the gravel, willing myself not to stumble, not to give myself away. There was a bench near the parking lot, half hidden beneath a lantern. I found it by instinct, lowered myself onto it, and sat. I don't know how long. Long enough for another round of laughter to fade, for a toast to rise and fall, for the music to swell and reach me faintly across the vines. I sat with the gift bag on my lap, both hands pressed down on it as though protecting something fragile. Though the only thing fragile in that moment was me. Eventually, I stood. My legs ached as though they carried a weight beyond my body. I didn't drive away. I couldn't. My name had been erased from their circle, their glasses raised in celebration of my absence. But I still had a name. Even if no one else wanted to speak it, I could. I walked along the side of the building, past the lit windows glowing with warmth I wasn't sure I wanted, and found the service door near the kitchen. The staff glanced at me but didn't question. Their hands were full of trays and glasses, their minds on timing and balance, not on intruders. My heels clicked against tile, quieter than my heartbeat. As I slipped past the espresso machine, past the trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres, shoulders square, eyes forward. The reception hall glittered like a scene pulled from a bridal magazine. Floating candles reflected in glassware, gold accents gleaming in the low light. Tables draped with ivory linens, each centerpiece perfectly matched. The kind of room designed to look eternal in photographs. I scanned for my table, 10 of them, maybe 12, each arranged in a neat circle around the dance floor. Each place card folded delicately, handwritten names in elegant script. I walked past them slowly, my eyes tracing each line of ink, waiting for the curve of my name to appear. Marcel Rowan, mother of the groom. Even just reserved nothing I circled again, slower this time, as though I might have missed it. As though the letters might bloom into existence if I looked long enough. But the space where I belonged wasn't there. My place had been trimmed away before I even arrived. I didn't ask for help. I didn't make a scene. I found an empty chair near the wall, half hidden by ivy wrapped with fairy lights, and lowered myself into it. The gift bag sat on my lap, my hands resting on top like I was guarding something precious. Maybe I was, not long after the slideshow began. Faces lit in the glow of the projector, music swelling with sentiment. Baby photos, toothless grins, sandy beach vacations. Lauren's childhood filled half the screen, ski trips, lakeside summers, smiling parents whose presence never faltered. I leaned forward, waiting for the frames I had sent in. Elias with his missing teeth, Elias on stage in his third-grade play. Elias asleep on my shoulder during a bus ride to Virginia. None appeared. The photos I had sent were missing. Each one replaced, reframed, or cropped so carefully it was deliberate. In one frame, I could see the edge of my elbow. Half a sleeve, before the transition swept it away in a swell of brass and floral overlays. The room applauded. I clapped once, twice, then let my hands fall. Later, when the toasts began. Lauren's mother dabbed her eyes, her voice breaking with pride. Elias spoke next, warm and steady, thanking everyone who had shaped him, everyone who had brought them to this moment. His eyes never met mine. His words never touched me. The first dance followed. Elias twirled Lauren across the floor, her gown trailing like mist. Then he danced with Patricia, Lauren's mother, a practiced sway that drew approving smiles. No one approached me. Not a glance, not a whisper. I stayed in my chair, my back pressed against ivy and fairy lights, my hands gripping the bag in my lap. I told myself I stayed because I needed to see how far they had gone without me. But as the night blurred, as the room filled with the sound of glasses and music, I realized I stayed because I didn't know yet how to leave. I didn't remember leaving the vineyard, only the way the air clung to me, thick with perfume and candle wax, the sound of glasses still clinking even as I stepped out into the night. By the time I reached the gravel lot again, my shoes pinched and my shawl smelled faintly of smoke from the fire pit where they had toasted my absence. I sat behind the wheel of my car with my hands still on the gift bag. I didn't start the engine. Not right away. I thought about walking back in, demanding a chair, a name, a moment. But what good would it have done? They had already decided where I fit. Not at a table, not in the slideshow, not in the speeches. My name wasn't written anywhere in that room. And I had seen how easily people clapped when it was erased, so I drove home. Headlights cutting through the empty country roads. The ribbon on the bag trembling in the passenger seat with every bump. The house welcomed me in silence. I set the bag on the entryway table, the burgundy ribbon still neat, the cream paper still smooth. I thought of untying it, of spreading the quilt across my lap and pretending it had always been meant for me. But I left it there untouched, a silent witness to everything unspoken. I didn't sleep. Not then, not in the hours after. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering instead. Not the laughter or the erasure, but the small, quiet sacrifices they would never speak of. The spring day when I sold my wedding ring. The pawn shop 2 towns over with its glass counters smudged from fingerprints. The man behind the register had weighed the gold band in his hand and told me a number. I nodded without haggling, without asking if it was fair. That money covered Ilias's college deposit. I had walked out into the late March cold without a ring and without regret, telling myself it was worth it for his future. He never knew. He only knew that the acceptance letter had turned into a place at the university, a dorm room, a life opening in front of him, or the night before prom. When he came to me late, asking if I could help, he had changed his mind after all, wanted to go, wanted to match the friends who already had dates. He didn't know how last minute it was. How I stayed up through midnight with the dining table covered in fabric and pins in my mouth, the iron hissing beside me. He wore that suit the next day, pressed and straight, and never asked what it cost me in hours or exhaustion. He only smiled when his friends complimented him, and I smiled too, pretending I wasn't running on coffee and aching joints. When Lauren earned that internship in D.C., Elias said she needed a wardrobe that looked professional, something that showed she belonged. I pieced together skirts, blouses, a fitted coat, folding each into tissue paper, sliding them into the secondhand suitcase I bought just for her. She thanked me casually, the way you thank someone who picks something up at the store. Not the way you thank someone who stitches until dawn. I told myself it didn't matter. Gratitude was never the point, and the wedding itself. The deposit for the venue paid quietly, directly, without receipt or mention. Flowers I had contributed to, though no one in the speeches remembered to say so. I reminded myself I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it because they deserved the start they dreamed of. But in the quiet after the wedding, sitting alone with the gift bag untouched by the door, I wondered if maybe I had wanted at least one word. A thank you, a glance. My name spoken aloud, morning came without rest. The photos went online before I even brewed coffee. Lauren's mother had posted an album titled Our Perfect Day. Over 200 images glowing in sunset light, lace and gray suits, champagne and sparklers. I scrolled slowly at first, scanning for my face, then harder. Searching the background, the corners, the mirrors that might have caught me. Not a single frame. There was one blurry, taken from a distance. A group shot near the dance floor. In the corner, I could just make out the slope of a shoulder, the shine of the brooch I had worn, cut off neatly by a crop. I recognized myself even in absence. I closed the tab. By noon. I picked up the phone and dialed Elias. It rang 4 times before his voicemail played. Its voice cheerful and casual, recorded months ago. I didn't leave a message. I told myself I didn't know what to say. But the truth was, I didn't know how to ask for acknowledgement without sounding desperate. The house felt too quiet. I wandered into the kitchen, opened the drawer where I had tucked the RSVP card weeks earlier. It lay there still, crisp and unsent, the edges smooth, the envelope blank. Lauren had handed it to me herself, firm eyes watching to make sure it reached my hands. Along with a printed schedule of events that I hadn't needed anymore. I pulled it out, smoothed it flat against the counter, slid it back into its envelope, and sealed it. Then I pressed a strip of tape across the flap. Not angry, not bitter. Just finished. I placed it back in the drawer beside the sewing patterns I no longer used. I shut the drawer. I turned off the light. I boiled water for coffee. Days began to stretch, strange and shapeless. I found myself reaching for my phone out of habit, scrolling to see if Elias had posted anything. If Lauren had tagged me in something, if perhaps someone had remembered me. But the silence was heavy, and the more I checked, the more it hollowed me out, so I stopped. Not in defiance, not in spite, just in exhaustion. The quiet felt cleaner. I opened the windows. I let the house breathe. I sat on the porch with black coffee, legs tucked beneath the same quilt I had once planned to give them. The gift bag still sat by the front door, ribbon untied, paper smooth. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. I began walking in the mornings before the heat settled in. Past the old post office with its faded flag, past the church with its peeling shutters. My joints protested, each step sharp at first, but the ache felt like a conversation with my body. A reminder I was still here. 2 weeks after the wedding. I walked past the community center and noticed a flyer taped to the window. Textile workshop. Beginners, welcome. A line of tabs hung from the bottom, phone numbers printed on each. My hand moved before my mind caught up. I tore one free, the paper soft between my fingers, and tucked it into my pocket. That evening, I signed up. The community center smelled faintly of floor polish and coffee when I stepped inside. Following the sound of voices down the hall, a sign taped to the door read Textile Workshop, Beginner's Welcome. Inside, folding tables had been pushed together, covered in fabric scraps and baskets of tangled thread. The chatter softened when I entered. A woman with close-cropped gray hair looked up from arranging squares of patchwork. "You must be new," she said warmly. "Come in, sit anywhere." I chose a seat near the window, where late sunlight spilled across the table. My hands trembled slightly as I unpacked my sewing kita thimble worn smooth, scissors wrapped in cloth, a few spools of thread. Tools that had carried me through years of quiet labor. The girl next to me, no older than 20, leaned closer and whispered, "You already know what you're doing, don't you?" Her eyes lingered on the way I threaded my needle without looking. "I used to," I said simply. It was easier than explaining I had sewn most of my life for people who never thought twice about what they wore or where it came from. The first hour passed in a hush of fabric and laughter. Some struggled with crooked seams, others joked about costumes gone wrong. I stitched in silence, muscle memory guiding my hands, but I listened. The stories around the table felt like a language I had forgotten I knew small. Ordinary details given freely. When the class ended, I stayed to help tidy the room, folding fabric and sweeping stray threads from the floor. The instructor noticed her smile kind. "You've got steady hands," she said. "Would you consider showing the group a technique next week?" I nodded, surprised by how natural it felt to say yes. She held out the sign-in sheet. "Name?" For a moment, I hesitated. Then I wrote it clearly in my own hand. Marcel Rowan. That night, the house felt lighter. I cooked eggs and toast, something simple, and for once I didn't clear the dishes right away. I lit a candle on the table and let it burn even after the plate was empty. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Weeks passed and I returned each Thursday. My hands remembered more than I realized. I brought scraps from old projects, Elisa's outgrown school shirts. A corner of satin left over from a dress Lauren once asked me to alter. I never told the group where the pieces came from. Those fabrics no longer belonged to them. They belong to me now. After class one evening, a woman named Denise stopped me in the hallway. She was soft-tied with laugh lines etched deep around her mouth. "You have a gift," she said. "Not just with the needle. The way you explain things, it makes people believe they can do it." I didn't know how to answer. Praise was something I'd given all my life, not something I'd received. I murmured a thank you and left quickly, but her words stayed with me. Glowing faintly in the quiet of my car, it was Denise who later suggested I sell my quilts. "There's a website, Etsy, people pay good money for work like yours," she said, running her hand over a sample I'd pieced together, "especially when it carries memory." The idea unsettled me at first. I had never sewn for strangers, only for family who barely noticed. But the thought lingered, and one afternoon I sat at my computer and created a shop. Threads by M. Rowan. I photographed a few quilts on the porch railing, the afternoon light catching the stitches. I wrote simple descriptions, nothing flowery, just fabric, size, and care. I pressed publish, heart racing, and then I closed the laptop. For days, nothing happened. No orders, no messages. I told myself it didn't matter. I kept sewing anyway. But then slowly requests trickled in. A man wanted a quilt from his father's denim jackets. A widow mailed me her late husband's choir robes. A young mother asked if I could transform a bundle of baby clothes she couldn't bear to pack away. Each order carried a story. Each stitch felt like listening. I worked late into the night, the hum of the sewing machine steady, almost like a heartbeat. The quilts went out one by one, and with them, a piece of my own silence unraveled. Months later, a reporter from the local paper came to interview me. He asked if my children were the reason I'd started sewing. I smiled, shaking my head. "I'm not just someone's mother," I said. "I'm a creator." He scribbled the words down. And they became the headline. Local artisan preserves memory through fabric. I cut the article out and pinned it above my sewing table. Proof, not pride. Still, the phone stayed quiet. I no longer checked Ilyas's photos online. I no longer waited for Lauren's voice to appear in my voicemail. My silence stretched longer than theirs, and instead of feeling like loss, felt like freedom. Until one evening, the phone rang. Elias, his name glowed on the screen. My chest tightened, but I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, his tone casual, as if we'd spoken yesterday. Behind him, I could hear Lauren's voice, light and laughing. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I said. There was a pause. "We were wondering." His voice shifted. "Careful now. Would you make something for the baby?" "For the nursery." Lauren thought it would be sweet, you know? Sentimental. The word clung in the air, baby. A grandchild I hadn't been told about, except through neighbors who had read the announcement online. They had spoken as though I already knew, and I had smiled, pretending I did. I looked at the quilt folded on my lap, one I was making for a widow who had mailed me her sister's dresses. My fingers pressed the fabric as I answered. "I don't sew for people who raise glasses to my absence." The silence that followed didn't wound me. It simply rested between us, solid and undeniable. "I see," he said finally. His voice was quiet. We ended the call soon after. That night, I opened the folder of estate papers I had left untouched for years. I read each line, each name, each instruction. Calmly, I made the changes I had avoided, writing my initials at the bottom of every page. When I was done, I brewed a pot of coffee stronger than usual, sat by the window until the sky grew pale. The next morning, I ordered a new mailbox plate. Brushed steel. The letters read simply, M. Rowan. The plate arrived in a padded envelope, heavier than I expected. I ran my thumb over the brushed steel, the letters cut deep. M. Rowan, clean, final, and mine. That evening, I unscrewed the old mailbox plate, the one that still bore the name I had taken and carried for decades. I laid it in the bottom of a drawer without ceremony. Then I fastened the new one, each screw turning tight, until my name caught the light of the porch lamp. Neighbors noticed. The next morning, Mrs. Carter from across the street paused on her walk, shading her eyes to look. "Look sharp," she called, her tone curious but kind. I only nodded, not offering an explanation. The truth didn't need to be given away. My days grew fuller. Orders from the shop arrived in a steady rhythm, each one a story. A box of t-shirts from a man's marathon races, still faint with sweat stains. Curtains from a family cabin, the fabric smelling faintly of cedar. A child's outgrown dresses, their hems ragged from playgrounds. I stitched them all into new patterns, piecing together memory into warmth. The workshop at the community center had grown too. I taught once a month now, showing others how to square corners, how to patch holes invisible to the eye. Some nights the laughter was so loud it carried down the hall. People began to linger after class, chatting, trading scraps of fabric, telling stories as though we had known each other for years. Denise often sat beside me, her easy voice making space for silences that didn't feel heavy. It was during one of those evenings, while I packed my tools, that she asked, "Have you thought of showing at the fair? They have a crafts section every autumn. Quilts always do well." I hesitated. The idea of standing in a booth, my work on display for strangers to touch, unsettled me. But her eyes were steady, encouraging, and I found myself saying, maybe. The fair came faster than expected. I spent weeks preparing, stitching late into the night, filling a rack with quilts each tagged with small cards that read "Threads by M. Rowan." The morning of the fair, I loaded the car, my heart racing. I told myself it was just another delivery, another order. But when I set up my booth, strangers came and paused, touching the fabric, asking questions, telling their own stories in return. By noon, I had sold 3 quilts. By evening, nearly all of them. That night, I drove home with an empty rack and a full envelope. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the way people looked at my work, as if it meant something, as if I meant something. Not long after, the phone rang again. Elias. This time his voice was different, softer, almost uncertain. "Mom, we'd like to come by. Just to visit." I gripped the receiver, staring at the quilts stacked on the chair beside me. Part of me wanted to say yes, to open the door, to smooth everything over like a seam pressed flat. But the memory of that toast, the sound of laughter at my absence, rose too clearly. "Not yet," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I'm not ready to be someone's shadow again." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then Lauren didn't mean it that way." "I know what she meant," I said, "and I know what I deserve." We ended the call politely, without anger. But after I set the phone down, I felt both lighter and heavier, as if I had closed a door that might never open again. Autumn slid into winter. The shop flourished, orders piling higher than I could finish in a week. I hired the girl from the workshop, the one who had whispered that first date, to help cut fabric. She worked cheerfully, her energy filling the house with a rhythm I hadn't known I missed. Together we shipped quilts across the country, each package carrying my name. One afternoon, while sorting fabric, I found myself humming. The sound startled me. It had been years since I had filled a room with anything but silence or the whir of a machine. I let the humming grow into a tune, soft at first, then stronger, till it became part of the work itself. In January, a thick envelope arrived. Inside was an invitation to the baby shower, cream paper embossed with silver. My name was written neatly on the front, as though nothing had ever been fractured. I set it on the table, weighed it down with a spool of thread, and left it unopened for 3 days. When I finally slid it open, I read the details, the place, the date, the theme, a little prince on the way. I placed it back in its envelope, sealed it again with tape, and slid it into the drawer beside the still-wrapped wedding gift. I told myself it was not bitterness, but clarity. Some places I no longer belonged, no matter how pretty the invitation. That week, I finished a quilt I had been piecing together quietly, not for sale, not for anyone but myself. It was a patchwork of fabrics from old clothes, scraps from forgotten projects, bits of lace, denim, cotton. It didn't follow a perfect pattern, but when I spread it across my bed, it felt whole. It felt like mine. Neighbors began stopping by more often, drawn by the warmth spilling from the windows at night. The sound of laughter when students lingered after class. One evening, Denise sat on my porch swing with me, sipping tea from mismatched mugs. She glanced at the new mailbox plate and smiled. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "Seeing your own name out there?" "Yes," I said simply. And I meant it. But the silence from Elias was still there, steady as ever, waiting. He knocked instead of calling. I saw his car first through the kitchen window, sitting at the curb like it wasn't sure whether to stay. He got out slowly, shoulders hunched against the cold, and walked up the path. For a moment I considered letting him stand there, the way I had stood behind the hedge at the vineyard, waiting, unheard. But I opened the door before the second knock. "Hi, Mom," he said. "'Kay," like it was the easiest thing in the world. I stepped aside. "You can come in." He looked older, the corners of his eyes shadowed, a tiredness in the way he held himself. Not from work, I thought, but from silence. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped so tightly they went white. He didn't ask for coffee. He just glanced around the room, the sewing rack against the wall, the framed newspaper article, the stack of orders waiting by the door. "You've been busy," he said. "I have." He cleared his throat, his hands twisting. "Lauren wants to make things right. She feels bad about how it all happened. The wedding knit got overwhelming. People said things they didn't mean. I studied him. His voice was careful, practiced, like he was reciting lines he'd rehearsed. I thought of the vineyard fire pit, champagne glasses clinking. Was it Lauren who toasted my absence? I asked softly. Or were you clinking glasses too? His face faltered. I didn't mean, but you didn't stop her, did you? He looked down. That silence filled the room more than words ever could. Not cruelty, not even mockery, but the choice not to defend, not to risk discomfort. I just didn't want to cause a scene, he murmured. I let the words sit there. You let them erase me, I said at last. And then you expected me to keep showing up as if nothing changed. He didn't argue. His jaw tightened, then loosened. After a long silence, he stood. I'll let you think about it, he said, his voice low. "I hope we can talk again soon." I nodded once. He walked out, closing the door gently behind him. This time, I didn't cry. Instead, I turned to the sewing table, thread already waiting. Work to finish, hands steady, fabric spread open like a life being stitched back together on my terms. The baby shower invitation arrived a week later. A Stell elephant smiling from the cardstock. Inside was a registry link, printed. Not written, not personal. I set it beside the wedding RSVP, both envelopes untouched, both sealed. A record, not a wound. That Saturday, instead of going to the shower, I went to the community center early, arms full of fabric bundles. The women trickled in, some quiet, some laughing already, some carrying burdens too heavy for words. We worked in rhythm, needles sliding through fabric, stories spilling out between stitches. Denise looked up at me once, her kind eyes steady. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked. I didn't pretend not to understand. I thought of Ilias's nervous hands twisting together, of Lauren's glass raised like a trophy, of every call not made, every thank you swallowed. "I miss who I thought they were," I said finally. "Not who they became." She nodded. No more was needed. At the end of the session, we gathered for a group photo. No one was cropped out. No one erased. When the camera clicked, I felt the weight of belonging, quiet but undeniable. That evening, I returned home to a stack of aprons from a commission, each one faint with flour and cinnamon. I pressed the fabric to my chest before folding it. Outside, the mailbox flag was up. Another card, maybe? I left it. Instead, I threaded my needle and stitched slowly, evenly, cutting away frayed corners and fitting the next piece exactly where I needed it. Spring came early. The daffodils bloomed against the fence, bright and unapologetic. One of the younger women from the workshop painted me a sign, "Home of M. Rowan, textile artist." I hung it by the porch light where anyone passing could see. That week, I baked lemon muffins and set a small table under the awning. No RSVP, no dress code, no speeches. Just whoever wanted to come. Denise brought iced coffee. Hannah arrived with her toddler and a sketchbook. Neighbors carried folding chairs and stayed until the lights shifted gold. We didn't talk about missing people. We talked about books half-read, about fabric dye, about plans for summer. At one point, someone asked where my family was. "Not here," I said with a smile. And for the first time, the words didn't feel empty. They felt right when the sun lowered. I folded the chairs, washed the mugs, and left the porch sign glowing in the dark. Inside, the wedding RSVP still sat sealed, its tape yellowing at the edges. I didn't reach for it anymore. It was no longer a wound, only a record. I turned off the porch light. The house behind me didn't feel too quiet. It felt true, filled with stories no one had edited, stitched exactly the way I chose.